Welcome again to our Going Green podcast. And today we're going to try and look at the topic of how to sort of heat your house. I went outside this morning and after it being quite pleasant, it was actually bitterly cold and it's time to sort of get the heating on. Yeah. And so we're going to try and have a look at something about that because we're here in the UK. We're seeing gas prices soar. And we know the government intend to try and stop new installations of gas boilers. They want to try and move us away from gas because, as we've talked about in other weeks, the sort of home sort of use of gas is perhaps as high as all the industrial.
Yeah, it's not as friendly to, what they were saying. More gas is burnt at home than it is in industry, because in the industry, like a home, gas costs, but they pay a more expensive price because they use a lot more of it. So they're trying to be a bit, not skimpy with it, but efficient. Whereas homes, people don't do or aren't that efficient with their gas. So, it's a different way. But one of the major things now going through is, of course, basically as the temperature gets colder, people are more interested in sort of heating their homes, and they go, but I don't want to pay all that gas, especially at the cost at the minute. It's record high amount. So it's hard to say, how do you keep your costs down or the gas usage down whilst being warm enough to survive?
Yeah,
we're talking warm enough to survive. We're talking about being above 20 degrees. That's the standard that everybody talks to, as opposed to, we're above freezing. No, it is staying at that 20 degrees.
It's got to be comfortable to sort of work on. So we know that the government in the UK is going to get rid of all sort of new homes having gas and oil installations by 2025, which is now not many years away. And they want to see no new gas or oil boilers sold after 2035. And I know recently my gas company that I buy my gas from said, oh, your boiler's getting old. Why not replace it with a brand new shiny gas boiler? And I think they're not quite getting the idea. The government came out this week with this idea of having a grant.
Their big plan, yes.
Yeah.
And effectively, they want, as well as saying they want to regulate to stop all these gas boilers coming in, what's the alternative? So they've said, well, they want to make everybody move over to these heat pumps, these air heat pumps, or even ground source heat pumps, and which is technically a more efficient way to heat a home. And it's no denying that. It's just, currently they are too expensive. So what they've done is they're giving out a cash grant, which is basically to subsidize purchasing the air pumps at the cost of a gas boiler. So instead of sort of paying £10,000 to £15,000 for these heat pumps, these air heat pumps things, so when a gas boiler is only £5,000, or they're now saying we're going to pay that £5,000 initially, or more, to cover the costs of bringing.
Give you a grant.
You a grant to bring it down to that 5,000. So now you've got the same, either the choice of a gas boiler or a heat pump at relatively the same cost, which might persuade the consumer to actually buy the gas pumps instead of the boilers, because they're now comparable cost-wise.
Yeah, but that's not true. So we got three alternatives basically for heating. The government came out with you can do ground or air source. You can use hydrogen, except we haven't actually got hydrogen sorted. We've actually working out how we can get hydrogen, but we haven't solved the hydrogen storage problem yet. Or, of course, you can go to district heating for social housing, but I don't live in social housing. So hydrogen at the moment is out. District heating for me is out. So really, I've only got the choice now of the sort of ground and air source heating. Now, a lot of people think that, I'll put solar panels on my roof, but that's no good for heating. my solar works really well on a nice sunny day, and in a nice sunny day, it sort of supplies all my electricity.
That's great.
But at night, it doesn't supply any at all.
And unfortunately, when the sun's not shining, there is no heat.
Yeah.
Which is, unfortunately, during the night time is when we actually want the heat. You know, it's the same point of the electricity. Usually during the day, you know,
it's bright and sunny. You can see, yeah.
You can see, so you don't need the lights on. But at night time, it's dark. You need lights on, so you're using more power. It's an ultimate conundrum in regards to,
yeah. You want the energy when it's not basically available. So we got wind power, but the government don't seem to be very happy with me wanting to build a wind turbine in my back garden.
No, but that, I think we're digressing off the point.
So let's go on and have a look at air source and ground source heating, which is what we want to try and look at today. Now, of the air source, there is a sort of a passive system that we've looked at where you can put sort of solar panels on the roof.
Yeah.
And these, we've got some which supply our hot water but won't do our heating, because in winter they don't supply enough heat to sort of, they'll heat the water up perhaps some sort of 4 centigrade as it comes in, 4 Celsius, up to sort of probably about 15 or 20. But then I need to use my gas boiler to heat up the rest. Okay, so I'm not getting an awful lot of heat in from there. We've got to put some panels in, and they sort of extract the heat from the air. But better still is probably an air source heater. Now, we've had one, we've used it for a long time now on our pool. And the way it works is this. My pool is at, let's say, 10 Celsius.
Whoa.
Yeah, I got in when I filled it up at 10 Celsius. I put a wetsuit on, and I was out within a few seconds, because even with a wetsuit on, it was, a few minutes, but it was still too cold. For me, anyway. Right, so what we did, we have an air source heater. We put water in at 10, and it comes in at 11. And it took a while to get it up to about 11. And then we're putting water in at 11, and it heats it up, sends it out at 12.
The answer is, so you're missing the point on how the air source. So basically what it does is it's an exchange, basically.
Yeah.
So
it's the opposite to a fridge.
Opposite to a fridge. So a fridge, basically, to make the inside cool, it makes the outside hot, right? So in this way, we're actually trying to do the heat. So we're actually sucking in, I say hot air, but just air in general, at any room temperature or any temperature outside is. And basically, it absorbs all the heat that it can get out, and it basically spits out cold air. Okay?
So if we stand in front of the air source heater, it is blooming chilly.
Yeah. So,
but even when it's really cold, like sort of minus something outside, the air coming out is even chillier.
Yes. And that's the critical thing. So it's actually, even when it's cold, it's still extracting heat, because it's just blasting out colder air. So, and then that heat is then basically pumped into your central heating, your hot water tank, your boiler. And as I said, it's a constant sort of, it can only add 1 or 2 degrees at a time. But if it's doing 1 or 2 on top of each other by the exchanging of more water, so it goes in 11, comes out at 12, goes in at 12, goes out at 13, in this cycle loop, it's a very efficient way of heating over a long period.
Because you're not actually doing any heating. What you're doing is you're just driving a pump, and you're taking the heat from the air outside. And it works down to about -8. And in the UK, -8 we don't get to very often.
I mean, if we do get -8, then I think we can declare it to be a mini ice age.
How many? You mean for a couple of days? Yes.
Yes. Well,
yeah. Paul's idea of an ice age is sort of when he sort of breathes out and he can see his sort of air coming out. Right. Anyway, so we got a problem with air source, and that is that if you leave it on all the time, you can keep your house sort of ticking over. But it's not very good if you leave your house to get cold and then you want it to try and warm up. It could take days to heat the house up.
Yeah.
And the other problem is because it's, when you touch radiators with a gas boiler, I touch it and I think, oh gosh, that's too hot to touch. And it's giving out loads of heat. Ground source, air source, both have the same problem, that when you touch it, you think, yeah, that radiator's cool. And it is giving out heat, but you're only heating the house sort of, at a lower temperature.
So a ground source heater, like in the central heating system, if your house is at 20, the water being pumped in might be at 25. So your radiators will only be giving off 25 or 5 degrees worth of heat. Whereas a gas boiler, the heat entering the system / the radiators, they're usually something like 70, 65, 70. That sort of range, which is a lot more heat from your 20 degrees house.
Yeah. And in fact, quite a lot of the time, the ground and air source heaters will be putting out heat not at that sort of temperature, but they'll be putting out heat at a temperature like the radiators will be at 21 and the air is at 20.
Yeah.
So it is very, very sort of low, but that is more efficient. One of the big problems is I've got an old house. It's not that old for some people, but a lot of the houses in the UK are quite old, and they weren't built to sort of modern standards of insulation.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that the government are looking at doing is they want to, all new houses built from 2025 onwards, because they had to put a date on it, they want to be, all of them to be B efficiency, B rated, essentially. And the other thing is any housing that was built in the last 10 to 15 years, so relatively newer homes, they've got a small grant system to increase their household efficiencies up to B standard or B rating. The other thing is, of course, if your home, if you, and they're also doing that for social housing and a bunch of other things, but they also want to do, other than the small program, if your house is an old development and it's sort of, you've got the grants, so if you can't raise it up to B, they want you to raise it as high as possible. So effectively, let's say your house is E and you get to a C grade and you're struggling to get to the B, then that is fine because you raise it 2 standards up. If you're going from, just a simple C to a B, then it's not as critical as you go from the E to the C. They're playing around with developers and sort of regulations in regards to, essentially they want to raise everybody up to B or to B efficiency or B rating, but they know that some places just will not reach that height or that level.
Yeah, and that's a big problem. What you can do to a house, the first and major thing you can do to try and increase your insulation is do the roof. Or most of the heat goes out through the roof. So that's why we have grants to try and allow sort of loft insulation.
Yeah, and how much of the loft insulation apparently needs to be more than 25 centimeters thick.
Yeah.
So, and to actually achieve a decent enough rating of insulation to, but the other thing they talk about is, 25% loss through the roof. Yes. But they say that 50% is actually lost through the walls because,
so that's the next major one you can do, which is cavity wall insulation.
And the government were doing lots of grants of doing lots of cavity walls. I know they were doing lots of programs in the social housing sector of doing all these things because, of course, they're trying to improve everybody's rating and then mandating it. So yeah, it's those are the critical things. The next thing, if you can't do insulation things, is actually buy some curtains, or more precisely, this is the critical thing, actually have sort of a thermal insulation blanket material in between your curtain and the window itself. So you can have basically a nice, pretty front curtain versus a backing back curtain.
Yeah, and the back curtain is a sort of a thermal curtain. And during the day, it's not so bad because you have the windows drawn and sunlight comes in, occasionally anyway. But at night, when it's cold, you don't want the heat going out, so thermal curtains will work. Right, now our next place we can go, you'd think the next one's always going to be double glazing. No, we haven't got to that. Floor.
Yeah, so
And there's a big move to go now to wood floors, which aren't so good, whereas the old carpet was actually not too bad.
yeah, so it's one of those things where all these lovely laminates, they're not very good because, unfortunately, and you sort of like, the laminate's not very good, so could you put something underneath? And usually they've got this sort of, insulation material to go underneath between the laminate and the other things. Okay, carpets have got an underlay as well, but unfortunately, old carpet insulation or underlay or insulation, those sorts of material, aren't very good at all because they were basically there to not support the carpet. That's the wrong way to put it, but to sort of.
Yeah. But they were to sort of try and help the carpet. There are things like big, thick felt things you could put down. That's the old style. There are various plastic things you can put down. Anything to try and insulate the floor. Then drafts are the next big one.
Oh, yes. Which, of course, is relating to, yes, the double glazing. But at the same time, if you've got a bad, I wouldn't say door, but a door seal, that's where you get your draft. Yeah. How many places have you heard about draft excluders? A place where that you got a draft excluder really should have a new, almost wall, door, window frame. The draft excluder, yes, it's preventing it, but it's still not enough to stop the problem. It needs to be removed, or more precisely fixed, so that there is no need for the draft excluder. We're not saying there's anything wrong with draft excluders, because occasionally, if you've got a vent, if you're trying to make sure everything's still ventilated, then yes, I can see that. But that's not quite what we're talking. If there's a definite draft and that needs to be fixed, hole in the wall or more hole in the window, those sorts of things need to be fixed, just because that leak is sort of nearly 10% of any heat loss.
So we got drafts, and then you get your double glazing, and they're not bad. Double glazing also does usually fix the drafts as well, but the return on investment on those is awful. It's sort of about 30 odd years. And I had someone ring me up to say, well, your double glazing's been in now for 10 years. I had to replace it. And, well, it's not as efficient as it used to be. What we need to do is change it all.
I heard you could put triple glazing in, which I thought was a bit of a laugh.
Well, 10 years ago, when we changed our double glazing because it was broken, I wanted to put triple glazing in, and the companies looked at me like I was stupid, saying, we don't do triple glazing in this country. No, they do. Right, so then that's the main forms of losing heat, and if we can save those, then this air source is going to work better. So let's now go on and have a quick talk about ground source heating. Because I like the idea of ground source heating, but then when I've had a look at this ground source heating, I've noticed some severe problems with ground source heating.
Such as?
Well, if you want ground source heating, you buy a little pump and you drive some water down into the earth. It goes around the earth, and the earth is, we know, it's hot underneath, and it's sort of the heat comes out through the earth slowly. And you can warm those pipes up and you can warm your house. But the systems I've seen, they dig down something like about a meter.
You were saying, what was it? The energy watch list guy. I can't remember.
Yeah, I said that the Energy Savings Trust did some trials, and they found that basically lots of ground source heating weren't installed properly. They dug down a meter. Now, you've got to go down at least 6 meters, and 20 would be even better. And as soon as you start to say someone you're going to dig down 6 meters, they say, oh, it's going to be expensive. Oh, yes, yeah. So you know you got that £15,000. Well, let's put an extra naught on the end there. So ground source, you've got to have a big area. You've got to dig down really quite deep, and you've got to lay lots of pipes down there. But if you can get down sort of 6 to 20 meters, the soil temperature down there stays at normally a nice, balmy, comfy sort of 10 Celsius. So you've got snow on the ground, it's really cold on top, it's 10 down there. In the summer, on the other hand, it's baking hot and it's 10 Celsius down there, which means you can use a ground source for heating in the winter and for cooling in the summer.
Which is one of those odd things where you think about cooling as well as heating. But if something's the same temperature all the time, then you can extract or release heat, and it will just not cope in the system, but it can actually change, or it can. I was going to use a biological homeostasis, which is basically it's a positive or even negative feedback loop in keeping something the same. And it's one of those things where you do notice that, with the ground being always at this balmy 10 degrees, and it's and you can go, further down than 20. They said, oil wells, they go through sort of basically it is 50 meters worth of 10 degrees. So you don't have to go that deep, which is why the 6 is the recommended
Minimum
you can go. It's because, and basically it's just always at that temperature, and the reason why is because the heat through the summer is slowly trickling through it.
Well, it isn't actually that. It's the fact that it's warmer above, and so the heat from the center of the earth is coming out, and because it's actually warmer above, less temperature is actually going out, whereas in the winter, because it's colder above, heat is sort of moving to sort of get rid of the cold. So it stays at normally about 10 Celsius, which is good. If you want to go mining, of course, and go down a mile or so, you find that you can't go down much deeper than that because the mines get too hot. And which is the principle of which we have geothermal energy. And we've got that project going down in
the Eden project.
Digging down quite deep.
Yeah, I think they're only going down a mile. I think that's what or it might be 1 kilometer.
Someone will correct us.
Yeah.
They're digging down quite deep. They're going to put water down there, cold water, goes down, gets heated up, and then comes out. And that water could come out as steam. And if it's coming out as steam, then you can drive a turbine. We're not trying to talk about that. We're just trying to heat a little bit of water up by a little bit. And then we can use these ground source and air sources as these pumps as sort of heat concentrators. So they can take some water at 10 and use that to heat up your water, which might go in at 20, to make it come out at 21.
Yeah, it's the same sort of system as the air heat pump.
Exactly
in regards to temperature. Temperature is sucked in and it raises another liquid by a couple of degrees as a heat exchange. Which but the critical thing of difference between the ground source versus the air source is because the ground source relies on the ground temperature, which is at the balmy 10 degrees. It's a lot more constant in regards to how much heat can be extracted to be used, as opposed to air, which, yes, it can heat up. It can extract, 5 degrees of temperature from anything above,
minus 15.
Minus 15.
That's the limit we can get down to.
Which is great and fine. But there's nowhere, you're pulling in 5, say, above, 0, which is 5 degrees. So that's great. But 5 degrees isn't that warm in regards to heating. And so you need these heat concentrators, but you need a lot more heat concentration for an air pump than you need with the ground source.
So ground source and air source are really good at trying to sort of do what I would like to term background heat to sort of keep it up to a certain temperature. And then if you want it any hotter, then you can use other devices to try and do that. But they, like, which are generally now going to be electric heaters, are very expensive to run, and they're much quicker at heating up, but they sort of are going to cost the earth, and they're going to use an awful lot of electricity up. And the point of trying to do this is trying to save as much as we can. This air source heating, ground source heating is still largely in its infancy. You can look at, none of the big players are really interested in this. You'll notice that between now and
I wouldn't say April.
it's going to be April.
April's when they're going to be starting all the gas suppliers, the people, boiler suppliers, so we'll be doing this. But alongside that, you'll probably see what in the next 6 to 12 months, loads of people sort of work on these things, because if they're bringing the price down and more consumers buy them, well, that means more money into that system, that industry, which then means more money for development. And it's a whole cycle, which is what technically the government's trying to create, this sort of, if they can work on the efficiency and the, all the heat concentrators a bit better to make them work, but that requires investment. And the way you can do that is by making people buy them, making it competitive for a gas boiler. And then you might find that soon gas boilers price will rise because not many people are buying them. So people won't be able to get as many of them because we're all buying heat pumps.
And that should be good. The other problem really that we've got with the heat pumps is that radiators aren't the best way of getting rid of heat from an air source or a ground source. Underfloor heating is by far the most efficient and best way of using those. But my house doesn't have underfloor heating. And if I want to, rip out all the radiators, and I want to rip up the floors and lay down lots of pipes underneath the floor to sort of do the heating there, that's great. But instead of costing me the cost of a boiler and connecting to my existing radiators, now this is going to cost me an arm and a leg. So in that $5,000 that they're offering isn't going to go very far when it might cost me £25,000 to rip all my floors up and put the other heating in. And can I afford it? And for me, the answer is no. And for a lot of other people, they're going to say, well, definitely not. I'm willing to, put a ground source, air source heater in instead, but still keep my radiators. But I don't think people are going to go ground source because they haven't got such big gardens, and you've got to get a sort of quite a big JCB in there if you want to dig down 6 meters. And at the moment, most contractors that I've seen aren't doing it properly. I've seen quite a few advertised on the web, and they're wonderful systems, and they dig down 1 meter, maybe 2 meters, but the actual thing says, well, between 6 and 20 meters, and they're not going to do that.
No.
So there are
not yet.
problems with changing these things. So I suppose it's going to be a case of trying to watch this space really to see how things are going to change. We'll probably come back and revisit this in 6 or 12 months' time, and we'll have a look and see how things are going. Maybe by then we will have, probably in this house, an air source heater in. So we'll be able to have a look. We've tried them on the pool. It works. We're not using the pool anymore because with COVID, we've turned it into a studio and a classroom. So we're not using that. So we probably will have to go towards this air source heater. Well, that's us this week. We've talked to you for about 30 minutes. So next time we'll have a look at some more things that are going to help us. I want to look at how we can actually become carbon neutral, because there's a lot of stuff in the press about COP26 and failing to do that. So that's for next time. Until then, it's goodbye from me and
Goodbye from me.
yeah. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.